Hello, yes, it's that time of year again. It's Christmas. And I was wondering what you were asking Santa for this year. And that got me to thinking what would be a good idea to provide therapists for Christmas. And so I've picked out 5 books. Now, they're not the 5 must-have books of 2019. They're not even the 5 must-have books for your career. But they are 5 books that I've learnt from, books that I enjoy, and books that I'd like to pass on and give you some ideas, perhaps if you're thinking about buying a present for somebody, for their put under their tree. So the first book is Factfulness by Hans Rosling. And if you have people, clients or friends, colleagues who are anxious about the world, then let me delve into the world of Hans Rosling, because he says in this book, and it's quite true, he says he'll teach us how to live a factful life. He says here, I will teach you how to recognize over-dramatic stories and give you some thinking tools to control your dramatic instincts. Then you will be able to shift your misconceptions, develop a fact-based worldview, and beat the chimps every time. Beat the chimps every time? Well, he took a series of questions around the world to professionals and non-professionals, and they're things like, in the last 20 years, the proportion of the world population living in extreme poverty has A, almost doubled, B, remained more or less the same, or C, almost halved. What do you think of this? It's almost halved. He has questions like, there are 2 billion children in the world today, aged 0 to 15 years old. How many children will there be in the year 2100, according to the United Nations? And we have 3 options: 4 billion, 3 billion, or 2 billion. And the answer is 2 billion. Most people, most of the time, will go for the 4 billion, or they'll go for the most negative worldview. In fact, Hans Rosling and his team took their questions to some chimps, asked them the questions, and they found the chimps actually got better results than people. So he takes you through 10 steps in order to help you live a fact-based world. I found it really entertaining, really fun to read, to dip in and out of, and it's really useful when you begin to think about how you view the world, how your clients view the world, and how that can change. So, Factfulness, that's the first book. So the second book is Opening Skinner's Box by Lauren Clark. Now this is an older book, it's been out for some 10 years or so, and it takes 10 psychological experiments and reimaginings them and reinvestigates them and their validity and how real they are. It takes B.F. Skinner, for instance, and talks about, the legend says he, B.F. Skinner, father of behaviorism, rational emotive therapy, and now CBT, he says he built a baby box in which he kept his daughter Deborah for 2 full years in order to train her, tracking her progress on a grid. The legend also says that when she was 31, she sued him for abuse in a genuine court of law, lost the case, and shot herself in a bowling alley in Billings, Montana. None of this is true, and yet the myth persists. Why? What is it about Skinner that so scares us? All sorts of interesting stuff there. Also, she talks about the bystander effects, which came out from the Catherine Genovese case, a woman in New York who was murdered while people stood around and understood what was happening, but did nothing about it. And I mention that case because it's a psychological experiment, it's a historical fact, and it's trotted out as an example. In fact, Winston Moseley, the man who murdered Christian Genovese, only died in 2018, which brings it really close to home in time. But the main reason why I've got this book out is because on being sane in insane places. She looks at the Rosenhan experiment. This is where the professor of law sent his students into psychiatric hospitals. They were only allowed to tell one lie, which is they heard the word thud, and the experiment was to see would they be admitted to hospital or would they not. And this is because he felt that psychiatrists had far too much power and they didn't know quite what they were doing. All the students were admitted and medicated, and the only way they could get out of hospital was to play the game, was to be the good patient. And when this whole theory experiment was published, it sent shockwaves to the psychiatric profession. They then started writing detailed descriptions of their diagnoses, so they could actually tell who was really mentally ill and who wasn't. One of the hospitals then said to Dr. Rosenhan, well, send us a few more patients and we'll filter out the real patients from the ones you sent. The time frame was agreed, and after the time frame the hospital said, we found the 11 patients that you sent us, and Dr. Rosenhan said, well, that's very funny because I never sent you any patients. Caused even greater stir. And what the psychiatric profession did was then really focus down on what are the diagnostic criteria which we use to describe our pathologies or the pathologies of our patients. And that led directly to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM, which we're now up to edition 8. And that's the manual that doctors and psychiatrists use to diagnose psychiatric disorders. It's also what insurance companies use in order to pay out on mental health insurance. That's where it comes from. And that leads us into the third book, Drop the Disorder. This is based on the conference that is run by Drop the Disorder, which is a group of people who are moving away from the medicalization of mental health into talking about stories. And in fact, the big question that they change, as it were, is that we as therapists should be asking our clients not what's wrong with you, but more importantly, what happened to you? What happened to you that you survived in this dysfunctional home? You had alcoholic parents, or you had violent partners, and you're still keeping yourself together. What's your story that leads to your behavior? Directly on and trying to get away from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the medicalization, the view that mental health problems don't come from or don't stem from genetics or physical issues, but they stem from interaction issues, from mental health and mental concerns. There's a conference that happens all around the country. It's a one-day conference. Happens 2 or 3 times a year, where people come along and talk about their experiences as service users of mental health services, as well as professionals talking about how they're moving on, using medications where required or where necessary, in a very small number of cases, but largely asking people how they've actually lived their lives and how they've come to be the way they are. It's a really important book for the future of mental health treatments. This next book is by David Chatmandari, and he takes 10 common myths about language and debunks them, basically. Things from people who say our language is going to the dogs. Well, they've been saying that since the 1700s, apparently, that language changes our view of the world and it changes who we are. Unlike Noam Chomsky, he doesn't believe there's an instinct, doesn't believe there's a biological, physical organ that we have that helps everyone learn languages. He says it's a social construct, and as a social construct, of course, it changes over time. And he takes these 10 individual myths and very entertainingly, but very specifically in great detail, tells you why they're wrong. Some people say there are some words in languages that you cannot translate into other languages. He says that's wrong, and other such myths. And it's a very entertaining read. Lots to learn. I read it in a couple of weeks, and I'll go back and highlight all sorts of things, no doubt. So there's another book for your Christmas stocking, perhaps. Don't believe a word of it. And this book, just to show that I can keep up with technology, is Oliver Sacks, The River of Consciousness, a really great read. If you haven't read this book, it's in fact, it's the last one that he wrote. He has published, or another one has been published of his essays post his death. But this is the last one he actually wrote. Lots of great stuff in here. He talks about time. He talks about H.G. Wells and what it might be like to live very slowly or incredibly quickly. He talks about the meaning of flowers. Darwin had a great love for orchids and learned how the orchid has developed through evolution, the structures that it has. And the most interesting one here for me is he talks about Freud, and he talks about the other road, Freud as a neurologist, before Freud got into his psychotherapy and his psychoanalysis. He talks about his work on flatworms, and he talks about his work on memory and the fact that Freud was a constructivist. He believed that as we access memories, they change and we can change them. So lots of great stuff there written by Oliver Sacks, and that's a really great read. Well, I said there were 5 books. In fact, I lied. There are 6. This is a rollicking great read. Whereas the other books are educational and informative and very useful, this is a novel. This is a story. If you know your French philosophers and French philosophy, there are lots and lots of in-jokes here that you'll probably get. I think I got about half of them. It tells the story of Roland Barthes, a French philosopher, who, after having lunch with Jacques Chirac, goes back to his flat, but on the way back, he gets knocked down by a laundry truck. And the question is, was it an accident or was it murder? Was he in fact about to disclose to the world the 7th function of language? Because of course we all know the 6 functions, but the 7th function, that's the MacGuffin. MacGuffin that Alfred Hitchcock described as the thing that people are going for. It's the ring in Lord of the Rings. It's Voldemort in Harry Potter. It's the thing that everyone's going after. What it is doesn't actually matter. It's the journey that matters, and the journey in this book is great, right through Paris, through France, through the world, through espionage, through terrorism, all sorts of things. And it's entertainingly written. Gets a bit kind of detailed and stodgy, I think, in the kind of the 3rd quarter or so. But it is really entertaining, and it's good fun. So if you want just reading for pleasure with a bit of information on the side, then this is the one for you, the 7th function of language. So there you are, 6 ideas for presents for therapists over Christmas. I hope you have a great time over the period. If, like me, you're going to spend some of that time catching up on that huge pile of books that never seems to go down, I hope these ones have given you some new ideas to buy for yourself or perhaps give to your friends. Whether you're spending Christmas on your own, with a small family, in a church, in a mosque, in a synagogue, in a nightclub, or surrounded by people that you love and who love you, I hope you have a very great one. If you're looking for peace, a bit of a mindful Christmas on your own, I hope you have a calm one as well. And I will look forward to seeing you in 2020. Take care, Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year.